Shimon HaTzadik B'Shiori Knesset HaGedolah. Shimon HaTzadik, who was during the Second Temple period, he was from the remnant of the men of the High Assembly. Hoya Omer. The world stands on three principles: Ala Torah, Ala Avoda, Al Gemilas Chasodim. The study of Torah. Avoda is the service of God, which means tefillah, prayer, and acts of love and kindness. Those are the three underpinnings of existence. Torah should be studied. One should pray to God, supplicate Hashem. And the other is what we call Bein Adam L'Chavero, man and fellow man, doing acts of loving kindness. It's Gemilas Chasodim. Besides the Gemara, the Talmud tells us charity is with the poor. Chesed is with the rich and the poor. To do kindness with your fellow, even if a man's wealthy, you're able to do kindness. Charity is only a person who doesn't have. When you do charity, it has a certain negative side to it. Because the person who's unfortunately needy, he feels compromised that he has to come on to ask somebody else for his kindness. It doesn't have the negative aspect of charity in terms of embarrassment, and also it can be done with anyone, whether the person is needy or not needy. The Chofetz Chaim points out that every human being in his life at some time needs chesed. For instance, what is the ultimate chesed, which we find that term used when Yaakov had asked his son Yosef, who was the viceroy of Egypt, to guarantee that when he passed away, he should be buried in Canaan. Yaakov himself couldn't do. Once a person passes on, he cannot do for himself. When a person's incapacitated, handicapped, can't do for himself. So the times in life, regardless of how capable you are when you're functional, the times where you're not functional, and you need others to assist you, you have to come on to others. You have no choice. A person is very wealthy and he needs a doctor. Of course, that's not his area of expertise. The doctor offering the services is chesed, and he has no choice. He'll pay for it. But for actually that the doctor is willing to offer services, that's chesed. He's doing a kindness to the person, the patient who needs his services, because he has that qualification. The person whose need doesn't have that qualification. So that's Gemilas Chasodim. Now, we find the three patriarchs. Avram is known as the pillar of living kindness. Torah speaks about his hospitality, how he had hosted the angels on the third day of his circumcision, where there were no wayfarers, and he saw three people coming, which he believed they were ordinary humans, but they were angels in human form, and how he addresses every level of their need, the material needs, and he begs them to accept his hospitality. So Avram is the pillar of loving kindness. Yitzchak is always depicted as the unblemished offering. We find Yitzchak went to pray in the field. When Eliezer was coming back with Rivka, with Rebecca, after he had negotiated a hand in marriage, it says Yitzchak went lasuach basodeh. And the Torah tells us, Chazal tell us, what did that mean? That he actually had enacted the tefillah of mincha, the afternoon service. Yaakov is depicted and quantified as what? Yaakov ishtam yoshev b'holim. He's the perfect man who dwells in the tent. Which tent? The tent of Torah. So when we speak about representation of chesed, at the most advanced level, that's Avram. He's a representation of love and kindness. Yitzchak is a representation of what? Of tefillah, prayer. And Yaakov is the ultimate level of what? Of Torah. He's the perfect man living in the tent of Torah. Before he fled to the home of his uncle, which he was instructed by his mother and father to go there to find a wife, he spent 14 years in Shem and Aver studying Torah. And only then did he go. That was his level of understanding and dedication to Torah that was essential to his existence. That's Yaakov. So there's a question which is asked. Rabbi Yehuda Nossi, Judah the Prince, was the redactor of the Mishnah. Why did he state it in a non-sequential order? If Avram is Chesed, and Yitzchak is Avoda, and Yaakov is Torah, he should have said the world stands on three principles. The underpinnings of the world are three. Gimel Chasodim, which is Avram, Avoda, which is Yitzchak, and Torah, which is Yaakov, but yet it begins with Torah. It's Torah, Avod, Gimel Chasodim. Why? Seemingly, it's sequentially, it's out of order. This question is posed by Rabbi Chaim Voloshin. Chaim Voloshin, in his commentary on Pirkei Avos, discusses this. Why does he state it in the sequential order? So he goes to explain that the law is a Jew is not permitted to lend money with interest. The lender is in violation, the borrower is in violation, even if the borrower initiates it, where the lender is willing to lend without any interest, but the borrower insists to pay the interest, the lender is not permitted to take the interest. So the borrower is in violation and the lender's violation. The law of which is known the law of usury, when did that come into effect? That came into effect after Sinai. Pre-Sinai, lending money even with interest was an act of kindness. That's Gemilas Chesed. Person needs money to pay a debt. He needs money that he should not foreclose on his house. He needs money to purchase something. For whatever he needs it for, the lender is doing an act of kindness. Regardless of what he has to pay for the money, which is the interest, it's still an act of kindness. So pre-Sinai, lending money or borrowing money with interest was 100% permitted, and that's the ultimate level of chesed. Fast forward post-Sinai, you're a violation. You're not permitted to lend money with interest, even though the borrower is agreeable to pay. What about a person becomes a usurer? He lends once or twice. His livelihood is he lends money with interest. As a banker, that means he's earning money illegally, according to the Torah, because the basis for your support, even if it is your livelihood, you're not permitted to charge interest. The Gemara tells us in Bava Metzia, a person's malvi beribis, a person who's a usurer, ein afro ninal tchias hamesim. He does not merit resurrection. That's how serious it is. So something pre-Sinai, which is the ultimate level of loving kindness, although you're lending money with interest, you fast forward post-Sinai, when you lend money with that interest, a person forfeits his right of resurrection. Okay? Now, pre-Sinai, if a person wanted to bring a sacrifice to God, was there any restriction in terms of location, where, how, what? Not at all. Pre-Sinai, you built an altar on your rooftop, in your backyard, wherever it is, and you bring the sacrifice to God. That's called serving God. That's service of God. Post-Sinai, God says that you want to bring a sacrifice, you have to bring it in the Mishkan. And after, when there was no longer a Mishkan, you had to bring it in the Beis Hamikdash, in the temple. What happens if you bring that sacrifice outside of the temple? It carries the liability of spiritual excision. That's how serious it is. That's how severe that transgression is. So post-Sinai, It's something which you terminate your relation with God. What we call koris, spiritual excision. Pre-Sinai, it's the ultimate. You bring a sacrifice for God. For instance, a non-Jew. A non-Jew is permitted to bring a sacrifice outside the temple. He wants to build an altar on his rooftop, on his backyard, bring a sacrifice. As long as it's for God, it's something very positive. A Jew is not permitted to do this. God says you want to bring a sacrifice, it has to be brought in a specific location. So therefore, what's avoda? What was avoda, what was considered service of God pre-Sinai, post-Sinai is not only not service of God, it has the most severe level of liability. It terminates your relationship with God. So Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Judah the Prince, who's redacting the Mishnah, says this: the world stands on three principles, three underpinnings. The first is Torah. What does that mean, the first is Torah? Everything is contingent on what the Torah says. Before we approach avodah, before we approach Gemilas Chasodim, we must study the Torah to understand what the Torah says is and what's not. Pre-Sinai was irrelevant. So sequentially, Yaakov was pre-Sinai. They were the founding patriarchs, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. So Torah comes at the end. That's where he fully fleshed it out, and he had the 12 tribes. Once we come to Sinai, everything starts with what? It starts with Torah. First, you have to say, what is an act of loving kindness? You may think it is, but it may not be. Lending money is an act of kindness. With interest is the ultimate level of detriment. That one doesn't merit resurrection. Pre-Sinai, bringing a sacrifice to God, regardless of where you bring it, is a mitzvah. That's serving God. Post-Sinai, you actually forfeit your share in the world to come. Spiritual excision. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who's authoring this Mishnah, says, where does it begin? It begins with Torah. After you understand what the Torah establishes, all the criteria and the parameters to do mitzvahs, now we could approach avodah, we could approach Gemilas Chasodim. That's Rav Chaim Volozhiner, the way he reconciles the question which we asked. Sibili, the order is Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. It should have been Gemilas Chasodim, avodah, and Torah. The answer is because this is post-Sinai. Post-Sinai, it all begins with Torah, and then we follow with the others. I asked the question. We find, and we should discuss many times, that when a child starts speaking, the first two verses you teach him, the first verse is Torah Tziv Elonu Moshe, Moshe Kilas Yaakov. Not, Mother Goose rhymes. First thing is Torah Tziv Elonu Moshe, Moshe Kilas Yaakov. The second verse you teach the child is Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. The first is Torah Tziv Elonu Moshe, and the second is Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, which is the unification, the unity of God. So I always had it difficult. I mean, seemingly, everything is based on Hashem Echad. That's accepting the dominion of God. Nothing exists outside of God. So if that's the case, the first verse that you should teach the child should be Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And the second verse should be Torah Tziv Elonu Moshe. But yet, the Gemara tells us in two locations, no. The first verse is Torah Tziv Elonu Moshe, Moshe Kilas Yaakov, and the second verse is Shema Yisrael. The question is why? According to what we're saying now, according to Rav Chaim Volozhiner, how do you even have an understanding of what unity of God is? You first have to study Torah. If you understand who sets the parameters, what is and what's not. For instance, I'll give you an example. One of the 7 Noahide laws is idolatry. Even a non-Jew is not permitted to be involved in idolatry. According to most commentators, Trinity for a non-Jew is not idolatry. Because they believe in God, except there's Trinity. For a Jew, it's idolatry. So, but how do you know this? Because that's what the Torah says. So the non-Jew could say, Hashem Echad. But Shem Echad, for the non-Jew, that's idolatry for a Jew. So the first thing you teach your child is Torah Tziv Elonu Moshe, Moshe Kilas Yaakov. Torah is exactly as Moshe dictated and transmitted to the Jewish people. Once you have his understanding, which is the word of God, now we understand what Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad is. So everything always is predicated on Torah. What's Torah? Torah is Torah Tzivlon of Moshe. It's what God, Moshe had commanded us, which is the heritage of what? Of the congregation of Jacob. Then, once you have that, then we talk about Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. It's very interesting, going back maybe 40 years ago, there's a women's lib movement, women's liberation. But it infiltrated into Judaism. And all of a sudden, women made their claim. If men have a minyanim, why can't women have minyanim? You have a women's minyan. Women read the Torah. Women say Kaddish. Why can't women join a minyan? And what do you need 10 men? Why can't you have 5 men, 5 women? Why does it always have to be man? The men. The answer is, they said, because since the ones who transmitted the Torah, interpreted the Torah, are men, the rabbis, the male chauvinists. So therefore, because of their sense of what women are, they kept them out. And everything is dictated based on their own understanding because they're men. But why should women be excluded? And therefore they said, we'll have a woman's minyan. There's a bat mitzvah. The bat mitzvah will get her a Hamburg and a Prince Albert, and she'll sit in the rabbi's place. Why not? So what I said was, nothing in Judaism is man-made, is man-developed except fences. The written oral law is divine. So that a minyan is comprised only of 10 men, that was communicated at Sinai. It's not the rabbis. Somehow they formulated this on their own. It's based on one of the methodologies of interpretation of the Torah. And nobody argues this. But it was transmitted at Sinai. A quorum is only 10 men, males, above the age of 13. That's what a quorum is. That's a microcosm of the Jewish people. 10 men. I take issue with that. If you take issue with that, you know what taking issue with? That means you're denying the divine transmission of Sinai, because God said it's this, and you have a question. And because you have a question, and you feel that you're second class, you reject it. What are you rejecting? You're rejecting something which is immutable. You're rejecting something which is God-given, and God says, this is the way it is, and it's no other way. It's like Korach. Korach wanted to be the high priest. He said it was nepotism. That was his claim against Moshe Rabbeinu. So Moshe says to Korach, just as you can't turn day into night or night into day, because that's the way God created the world, God set certain things in place. Only Aaron is qualified to be the Kohen. You're not qualified to be the Kohen. Based on the spiritual makeup of a man and woman, the spiritual makeup of a male soul is different than a woman's. As a result of that, only 10 men create the quorum, which is the equivalent of a microcosm of the Jewish people. You take issue with it, take issue with God. That's who you take issue with. As a result of that, if you go against this, it's really an act of heresy. It's heretical. Because you're not accepting what was transmitted from Sinai, that a quorum is only 10 men, not 10 women. And there are many applications of this.